demands and much more stress in most of my clients' lives in some way or another. And so to set the stage, I just thought it would be nice to kind of cover, well, what is stress and what does that look like? And so one of the important factors about the stress response in our body is that it's actually a very normal and good response to have for the short term. So one of the examples that I often use with clients is, we probably all have been in a car accident or in a near miss. And when that happens, we feel that complete adrenaline rush, like you slam on the brakes, your body jerks. You don't even realize sometimes what happened until after it happened. And that's your body doing very well what it's supposed to do in a flight, or I should say in a life or death situation where it goes into fight, flight, freeze. And so all of that adrenaline rush is preparing us in a very serious situation to either fight our way out, to freeze if needed. And so the thing about that stress response is that while we can all feel the impact in a very scary situation, when we are under chronic stress, our body is physiologically activating all of those same responses, but at a lower grade. And so it's that lower grade, sort of beneath the surface response of our adrenaline, of all the different hormones, that begins to create potentially maladaptive long-term impact. And so some of the things that people experience during chronic stress is they'll experience frustration, they'll get burned out, they'll feel powerlessness in their job, perhaps not able to achieve one's goals. But we also see under chronic stress an increase in depression or addictive behaviors. And I think maybe even more critical in some cases is that it can really turn into chronic disease. So one of the things, what many of you may or may not know is that I've spent most of my career working within a major medical health system. And so through that experience, I was able to work in clinics like sleep clinic, HIV, primary care, diabetes, and most recently, the last one was GI. And what I loved about each of those experiences is, of course, is it continued to cement my mind-body connection awareness and how to work with clients through that lens. But I would get these wonderful little nuggets, like the GI doctor I worked with. I never knew, who knew that we had more nerve endings in our gut than up and down our spine. So when we say things like, I feel to my gut, like it's a real thing. There is actually a brain-gut connection. And that's why we see so many things like GI disorders. People their stomach gets upset when they're anxious. There's so many nerve endings in our gut. And then that leads into things like when your gut health is off, then everything is off, because your gut is also major production of your hormones. So your healthy gut bacteria also helps regulate your hormones. And so when one hormone system is off, then other things are off. And so again, it just is reinforcing this interconnectedness. And so knowing that you cannot really separate thought from gut or thought from body, I think it's really important then with my clients to really look at the different pillars of self-care, because we spend maybe 1 hour a week together, but in all those hours in between, they really need to be working on these different pillars. So Alex, if you would go to the next slide.
Yes.
We always check in with sleep. So the 7 pillars, just to say quickly, and then we'll do a bit of an overview on each one, but it's sleep, movement, nutrition, our relationships with self and others, our environment, spirituality, and then your resilience. And so sleep being one of the most cornerstone parts of our health and well-being, it's often ignored. It's often brushed aside. But one of my new favorite guys that I follow is Doc Parsley. He, I believe, is an internal medicine. He actually is an ex-Navy SEAL who went back into medicine and then sort of fell into sleep medicine based on his work with the Navy SEALs. And what he talks about is how the average American is only getting 6.2 hours of sleep. Yet research continually shows us that most of us need right around 8 hours. All of the research for decades has shown that anything under 7 hours really begins to have chronic health issues in the long term. And what I think is really important to realize is that people push sleep off is like the non-essential. In our American culture, we are all about what we have to do, what's next, what's next, what's next. And sleep is sometimes a thing that people really push aside. And then when you add in technology at night, people get sucked into their technology and then they ignore sleep even more. Yet we cannot make up for regular sleep. There is no such thing as like on the weekend, I'll sleep more and make up. Because each night that, like if you're getting 1.8 hours less each night, you are negatively impacting potentially 7 genetic markers. You are waking up with decreased mental function. Actually, Doc Parsley says that it's like having, I forget what he actually said, but it's having like a low blood alcohol count when you are not getting enough sleep because you have poor coordination and endurance. I definitely see with so many of my clients increase in negative moods, increase in anxiety, increase in BMI and weight. Now, many people wouldn't necessarily think about that, but sleep also regulates our hormones, and it regulates things such as ghrelin and leptin. And so when you're not getting enough sleep or the quality of your sleep is off, then you're also messing with your hormones, which messes again with everything, because every system or everything that our body does is actually run on hormones. And when you upset that balance, it upsets everything. So to name a few benefits of sleep, it would be hormone regulation, memory, because again, as much as we know about sleep, we don't know. So sleep is also important in our memory formation. It is, of course, about energy and resting your body, but so much more is happening during those hours. And so what I love to cover with my clients with sleep being one of the pillars. And again, I apologize for everyone. This is such a brief overview, and we could absolutely deep dive a whole hour on sleep on any one of these categories. But number one, routine is super, super important. It is always important that we are not varying even on the weekend by a couple of hours. We need to give ourselves enough time in bed. So I just was working with a gentleman yesterday who he's literally not even in bed more than 6 hours. So there's no way he can get 7 or 8 hours when he's only physically in his bed for 6. One of the other issues that so many people talk about with sleep is that once they finally lay down at night, that's when the mind starts to go, because potentially they've been running all day long, go, go, go. And so it's when they finally hit the pillow, they start to process. And that is not the time to process if your goal is to sleep, because one of the key tenets of sleep is that you can't do it. You cannot actively go to sleep. Sleep overcomes us, and it only overcomes us when your brain is bored. So your brain has to be bored to fall asleep. If you are worrying, if you are thinking of your to-do list, if you're just sort of hashing out your day, that's all way more interesting, and your brain will continue to chew on it. So I'll give you one of my favorite techniques. I've been using this for decades. Sometimes I kind of forget about it, and then I'll be a half an hour in, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I need to do my thought stopping. So the technique is repeating one word over and over and over until you fall asleep. And there are only 2 choices I offer clients: the or one. And so in my mind, when I desire going to sleep and I notice that my brain is running, I start to repeat the word. I personally like one. So in my mind, silently, I start to repeat one, 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 and then my mind will jump, and I just gently bring it back. Actually, what I will say to myself is, oh, there I go thinking. I just label it. Don't get upset. I just go back to one, one. Because the thing is, people who have trouble with issues with sleep is that they don't find that when it doesn't immediately work, they get frustrated. And then when we get frustrated about the fact that we're not sleeping, we are doing the exact opposite again of being bored. The other reason that I use the one word over and over and over again is that we've often heard of things like counting your sleep or counting your sheep or counting backwards or any number of like machinations like that. That's actually making your brain work. To actually count by threes, you're thinking. And so again, our goal is to get you not thinking. So don't give up on it. It works for the regular good old, run of the night. Now, I always want to say if something traumatic's happened, if something huge has happened, this probably won't work. But just on an every night kind of basis, this is my go-to. The other thing I often pair with it, I don't have the exact one with me, is I almost always every night use essential oil. So I've used this for years, and the older I get and the more my hormones are shifting, I can tell you that the oils are even more important. But anything that's lavender based for the most part, or if you have, a brand that you like and it has a sleep blend, if you will. What I do with the oils is that and invariably, as long as you don't mind the smell, I put it on the pulse points. I'll put a little bit on the back of my neck, a little bit on the wrists, and then most importantly, the bottom of my feet. So interestingly enough, the bottom of your feet is a wonderful conduit for the essential oils. And so if I wake up in the middle of the night and I feel like this restlessness, I pull it back out. You really can't overdo it. The only thing that people will complain about if they don't like the smell, then put it on the bottom of your feet and just keep it away from your sense of smell. You can also diffuse it through a diffuser, but I just find like actually putting it right on the skin works really well. And then the other things, and you can Google if sleep is a really, really big issue, there are a number of really good, free resources, and you would just Google like sleep hygiene or sleep tips, but we don't want to eat heavy food right before bed. A lot of people use alcohol and it helps them feel nice and relaxed and drowsy. But the problem with alcohol is it will absolutely disrupt your quality of sleep. And then caffeine, for some people, they're super sensitive and they can cut it off in the morning and fall asleep okay. And some people just need to eliminate it altogether. So again, I know there's lots more about sleep, but that's just to hit some of the highlights.
That was super helpful, Tara. I know that sleep is something I used to struggle with. I used to travel a lot for work, and so I was be in a different location all the time, and that really affected it. So these are really, I wish I knew all of this a couple of years ago.
It's basically do the one word in the oil, and that's like my go-to.
That's awesome. And do you have like recommended times we should be sleeping? Like suggested, this is when it's suggested to go to bed and wake up.
I think if we were to go back to natural, and that's why we can deep dive into sleep, like there's lots of research coming out about blue light blockers and all the screen time. And, most of the sleep experts will tell us to start shutting our technology down an hour or two before bedtime. One of the things, again, I didn't say is that, so melatonin, which is naturally produced in our body, and as daylight shifts down, our melatonin is supposed to rise. But with all of the artificial lighting that we are under 24/7 for most of us, that melatonin disruption is huge. So a lot of people find a lot of benefit by using melatonin. But that's all to say is that natural rhythm with the daylight is probably what was ancestrally used. But for most of my clients, I really just advocate that if you know that you need to get up at a certain point, then back out the hours to make sure you're getting enough time in bed. And I also think the other quick, really big tips is that we should never nap after 3 p.m. because that again will interrupt the nighttime cycle. And then the power naps are huge. We should really keep it to 20, 30 minutes because the problem is that once you dip past that, you may potentially go into a full cycle. And waking out of that can be very disorienting and groggy, and then again, interfere with your nighttime. The goal of our evening time of those 8 hours is that we're getting through a couple full cycles of sleep so that your body can do all the amazing things that are happening during those cycles.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
That's great.
Okay. Oh, yes. Movement. So movement is like movement and nutrition are probably like the top two. That and then thought management are probably the areas that I love to spend my most time with clients. Okay, so here's the shtick about movement. It needs to be joyful movement. The older I get, the more that I explore this, the more that I am just convinced that it's really all about regular movement, and gentle movement that we enjoy. Now, if you love rigorous, what's the word I'm looking for? CrossFit kind of workouts and distance running and all of those things, like, go for it. Like, if that's what your body loves and that's what you love for yourself, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But for most people, it's just, we don't get enough movement. And so finding some movement that's regular, that gets you, so I sit all day long. And if any of my folks are on this call from my daily method, they know I'm a 6 a.m.er every day, Monday through Friday, because I sit all day long. And so sometimes that's virtually the only movement I'm getting. And so movement, exercise, of course, we know that strength training, light strength training is helpful for bone health. I'm looking at it more for, like, movement helps us age gracefully, and I like to chew on ideas. I always think back, like, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, like, we moved naturally so much more, everything, like, from dishes to washing our clothes to just getting from A to B involves so much more natural movement. And now we manufacture our movement. I always think, like, how funny would it be if our ancestors watched us on a treadmill?
Yeah.
They would be like,
doing this for fun?
What are you doing? Like, you're walking on this moving van. Like, think about it. That would be, like, so crazy. So long and short of it is figuring out how to fit movement in, figuring out how you can hopefully enjoy it or make it less painful. I get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but even tiny movements, little movements dispersed in your day, if it's hard to get, like, a 30-minute session in. And then the last thing that I really have thought more and more about and have experienced through all the reading and research is that the old myth, and we still hear this in the medical system, that we're supposed to exercise if we want to lose weight and if we want to be healthy. We're supposed to exercise more and eat less. That's the formula that most of us have grown up on. And I think you can just look at the last 40 years of American history and you can see that that hasn't worked. There's a lot of reasons behind that, and too much for one presentation, but one of the things that, so for instance, I used to distance run and I always gained weight. And part of that is because we have this little voice in our head, well, I've just exercised, I've just run like this many miles, so I'm able to eat more. But the truth of the matter is we can never exercise off a bad diet. So it becomes way more about our diet and, like, our general nutrition than how much we're moving. So if you think about, I think what I forget now the exact, some folks might know, but like a pound might be 2,700 calories, something like that. Think about how many minutes on a treadmill that would take to burn that many calories for 1 pound. And, and so it's just like this whole myth of, like, well, I just need to exercise more to lose weight. Well, it can help you in so many great, wonderful health benefits, but it's not necessarily going to get you to that weight loss goal. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Next slide.
Next. Yeah, that's good. All right. Third pillar is nutrition. Nutrition might be one of the most confusing, wonderful, confusing, frustrating areas for a lot of folks. I think the simplest thing that we can really begin to think about is eating whole, non-processed foods is healthier. For so many years, we have been buying into different myths. For a while, it was the low fat, high carb diet was supposed to be the way. I don't know if it was 40, 50 years ago, but, the American Heart Association was saying that saturated fats were bad and we should eat things like margarine. And so they started to come up with all these different processed oils. And when you begin to peel back the layers of, like, how these nutritional facts became mainstream, it's actually pretty disturbing. It's a lot of it's big business behind it, big food companies, it's not necessarily research backed. It's actually big company, big money backed. And so if we just think about it in the simplest terms, eating whole, non-processed foods is always going to leave our body in a way that it was designed. So one of the things that, so many of my friends are in like the integrative nutrition world, or some of the dietitians I used to work with, like, it all comes back to reading the labels in our foods. So first, number one, if you flip over the label, and this is something that we all need to get very used to doing, is that when we read the label, if you cannot pronounce the word, or you're not sure what that is, if you can't read it, your body can't read it. Like, it's just basically that simple. Like, when we take something from its whole natural form and then we produce it. So even like going from whole milk to skim milk is not necessarily healthier. And for the longest time, people were thinking, well, I'm switching from my 2% to skim. And, there's just so much around the current research that's coming out that your body actually can process that. Well, not everybody can process dairy, but those that can, like, they process it actually better when the fat hasn't been taken away. So like, that's just one part of nutrition. And then you get into like the confusion of, well, should we do keto? Should we do paleo? Should we, vegetarian? And so I think really finding the way that works with your body is the message around nutrition. Like, not one diet fits all, but we can say that eating whole, non-processed, meaning taking out the flours, the sugars, the hydrogenated oils, those kinds of things are the things that are really making us as a culture very sick. The thing also that we don't think about is that our food, so when your body can't read it, and yet it's coming into our cellular DNA, and your body is starting to incorporate it into, so what we become what we eat, right? But if your body doesn't know what it is, then we start to see so much more inflammatory disease, because our body is looking at our own cells as like being foreign objects, because it's starting to absorb these things that it doesn't understand. And then we start to see a lot of inflammation. And so when we take out things like sugar and flour and things that we're not supposed to eat, we actually see a decrease in inflammation. So that's just, like I said, this is one of my favorite topics. I could go on for hours about it. The other interesting thing is thinking about hunger. So hunger, what I've discovered, especially in our current cultures, we are so afraid of being hungry. In fact, we don't ever have to be hungry, because we can get food 24/7 now. With the shutdown of a lot of things, more and more people are having food delivered to their house. They don't even have to go to the grocery store, and you can basically go on Amazon and get any single thing that you want at any time. But hunger, and the other very interesting thing that people perceive with hunger is that when their body is not working well and they're being energized by the sugars they're eating. Sugar in our bloodstream is a very unstable energy source. And so your body, when it eats something that's like pretty processed, it's going to crash a few hours from that sugar crash. And then that's where people feel jittery and shaky. And they think that they need, what do they need more of? They need more fuel to fuel their energy. And that's actually the opposite would be more natural to us. When we are hungry, we're energized. When we are running off of our own fat stores, our own ketones, we are just energetic. We can go for hours. We can run. We can exercise. Think of hungry wolves. Think of, any hungry animal in the world, right? If it were fatigued when hungry, it would never be able to chase down its prey. It wouldn't be able to do that. And so when our body's operating adaptively, we can be hungry and we can get things done. And we can get things done because that would be that. I mean, that makes sense in terms of like how our body was designed to thrive. Like if I'm hungry, I should have the energy to go out and pick wild berries and hunt down some game and all the hard work that it used to take to get food. So again, so much behind nutrition, so much around that being one of our main pillars. What I think, most of us have gone down this route some way or another. And so when you're thinking about it for yourself as one of the pillars of self-care, you just start somewhere. You start small and you start understanding that, where you can make small sustainable changes is really where it begins. We don't have to overhaul our whole diet. So for instance, I was talking to someone this morning who has PCOS, which is an issue with hormones and the way that she processes foods, and it has a lot to do with insulin. And there's a higher concordance of PCOS and type 2 diabetes. And so we were talking, I had her read a book on it, and she just 2 weeks later was talking about how amazed she was, like just understanding that the way that she eats and choosing unprocessed foods, how that can even help the long-term, train that she was sort of heading on a train wreck. If she continued on the path she was on, she was already having a lot of hormonal disruption, which was going to lead to potentially even more down the road, looking at her family history, where it was going to lead to something like type 2 diabetes and obesity and other things that were like coming her way. And so, yeah. Any thoughts or questions? Because I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I can't speak for everyone, but I find myself wanting to grab more snacks when I'm working from my computer. Like I feel the hungry energy is fine when I'm up, like I'm out and about. Like if I'm on a really long hike, I'm okay. If I'm doing like kind of busy work that's like cleaning or kind of physical stuff that's around the house, I don't feel myself craving it as much. But I do notice when I'm like sitting in front of a computer, I'm like, I really want something to snack on right now.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation there?
Well, there's a lot of ways we can approach that. I think, generally speaking, unless you are on a health protocol, like something like if you are insulin dependent, that's a whole separate category. And in fact, the whole 6 meals a day, like breakfast, snack, lunch, dinner, or lunch, snack, dinner, really was born out of the American Diabetes Association sort of their recommendations. And we've adopted it as the American diet. And again, it has not helped our culture because we're not meant to be eating every couple of hours. It's like your digestion really wants to do the whole, like go through the whole process of digesting your food. And I'll get back to your question, but the point being is that once your digestion starts on a meal, it wants to run its whole course to do what it needs to do. But when we keep throwing a snack on it, it's kind of like starting a load of laundry and you keep throwing in a pair of dirty socks. It's never going to be able to do what it really needs to do to work through its entire system. And so, number one, in general, snacking is not probably for most people. Some people, I don't mean to say that people don't function well that way. Some people really do, and they maintain their weight and their energy and everything. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of unnecessary snacking. And so one of the techniques is, if you really want to dive down into this nutrition world, like planning is always the big deal. So not only week planning, so planning, like on a Sunday, doing all of your food prep and planning out your week's worth of meals, something that I've actually been playing with the last couple of weeks and in different ways working with my clients is actually the night before I'm writing out exactly what I'm going to eat the next day. And then and it's not to beat myself up if I go off plan, but it's just to create that awareness of where I'm throwing unnecessary things in. So, okay. So one of the techniques that someone might use is making sure that their lunch is super fulfilling, making sure that your lunch has, enough nutrients, protein, fat, the right kind of things that when your body is nourished, it decreases its cravings. When it's, when we are getting poor quality food in our system, and that's what we're, trying to survive off of, then your body is always sort of craving because it's never really getting the nutritious, the nutrients that it needs. So number one, don't bring the snacks to work. Just remember that you won't die if you're a little hungry. There's lots of different types of hunger. There's somatic hunger, there's clock hunger. So like we train our body to be hungry at certain times. So if you always give it a snack at 3 p.m., it's always going to tell you at 3 p.m. it wants a snack. Yeah. I think I say this a little bit later. So like if you're just using the snack example, so the 3 options are this. The minute your brain says, I want a snack, well, then you begin to crave the snack and you want the snack. And so your brain is kind of screaming at you, whatever you have in your drawer, like granola bar, I want that granola bar. And so, so your first option is you can give in, take the snack, eat it. And then you've rewarded it with a little bit of dopamine kick. It's a little feel good. When we eat, we get pleasure. And then that's like That's a good thing. And your brain already knows that too. So the minute you're giving the brain the idea that a snack is coming, it's happy. It wants that snack.
Yeah.
The second option is you can just get really ticked off and feel deprived and frustrated because you're not supposed to have that snack. You're not going to have that snack, but you're really like resisting the snack and you're really sort of struggling against it in your head. The third option, which is probably the one I'm suggesting is the one we go with, is we just sit with the urge. One of the techniques people can use is they can set like most of us are wearing these smart watches. You can set a timer for like 15 minutes. And 15 minutes goes by and you'll get busy doing something and you'll forget about it. That's not real hunger. That's craving. And the other thing to recognize between hunger and craving, if you're hungry, broccoli and baked chicken sounds good.
Mm.
When you're craving typically a very specific one food, right? So hunger, you could open your refrigerator and any number of healthy options actually would satisfy. Craving is like one or two very specific things. So.
That's super interesting. Very helpful. Good to know while managing a co-working space that we buy snacks. So it's a good thing to know and to be able to help members with it. They're like, I need to stop snacking. So yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, spirituality, another amazing area of self-care. And people describe spirituality in so many different ways. I just realized, wow, I might need to move a little faster. Spirituality is just really, if you want to boil it down, it's our values and our beliefs about ourselves and the world. It really takes the acknowledgement of, what is the purpose and meaning in my life? And then setting aside time for that reflection, that prayer, that meditation. So spirituality, from so many people, they would describe it as how they feel grounded. And when I was in the training at Arizona, I guess now that would be a few winters ago, one of the things that can be very spiritually grounding for folks is just to step outside on our bare feet. There is an energetic pulse on the earth. And we are meant to be connected to the earth. And yet most of us are not. Most of us live within concrete 24/7. And this is something I have to admit, I don't rarely think about doing, is taking my shoes off and go standing in the grass. But so you can find spirituality in those moments, just in like being in nature. And if you have a belief in God, like thinking about his creation. If you are Buddhist, it's just really feeling or that type of, but it's just really taking like, so do I feel interconnected with people? Do I feel interconnected with my surroundings? And am I taking time to just center myself in that belief or in that moment? So we'll just leave that there. Next slide.
Definitely.
Relationships. So this again is another area of focus. It's not just with other people, but it's ourselves. And the number one thing to recognize is that unless you're the really odd individual, most of us are hardwired for connection. We have different levels or needs for that connection. But when it comes down to it, we're hardwired for it. So for instance, we are hardwired with this innate love for our child. So for anyone who's had a child, but we are all children of someone, right? So there is this hardwiring that we love our children, and that comes back to survival. If we didn't love our babies, we would have died off a long time ago, which is very different than our romantic love. So when we're hardwired for something, it takes no thought. It's just there. It's innate. It's like a drive. Whereas romantic love, which can be very important, and we definitely need obviously most of us feel the need to be connected to that partner. But the difference between the two kinds of love is that with romantic love, it requires thought. And anywhere we can put thought in, we can mess it up. So relationships can take a lot of different kinds of work and a lot of different intentionality. And a real quick tip is that typically when we are feeling really disconnected from, let me say it differently, when we're feeling really frustrated with someone in our life, that's usually an indicator that we're not connecting. Our natural tendencies with being frustrated is to pull apart. Like, I'll give you your space, you give me mine. let's just take a little time off. But really what it is we need, and I think Alex, you spoke about the relationships a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's right. It's that connectedness. And it's not that you have to do anything magical and have amazing dates. It's just really setting aside that time. So
Yes,
yeah.
agreed.
All right. Next slide. Resilience. Okay. This is a big one. This is where I probably spend so much of my time throughout a day. How do we cope with that stress? What I mean by behaviors to add or delete is that when we look at these 7 pillars, I don't know anyone that has all 7 in perfect balance. It's like we put a little intentionality in one area and then that feels good. And then we need to put a little more attention somewhere else. And so it's this constant balancing act, I think, and just different space and different time in our lives when we need different things to become the focus. But when we're feeling particularly stressed, and I think we all kind of know what that looks like in ourselves. Like, so are you increasingly irritable? Are you losing things? Are you, just feeling more frustrated and more just out of touch with things? Like, whatever your red flags are, that is the time to look at what behaviors am I putting in that are not healthy? Things like overeating, over drinking, over shopping. So a lot of times we use things to buffer the negative feelings. And so those are behaviors that we've added in that are not helping. And then we need to look at our list of the things that ground us, that center us. And it's very often that when we're feeling really stressed out and we're feeling the impacts of stress, that list, like we're missing things. We're no longer doing things that usually ground us. A lot of times when people get really stressed out, like if they have like pressing work deadlines, guess what they throw out? They throw out their exercise. Well, I don't have time to exercise anymore. Or they're burning the midnight oil. So they're no longer getting the sleep they need. And so anyway, it's just looking at kind of this balancing act of, do we need to add things back in that we know ground us? And then what is it that we probably need to rein in or take out? A big part of our resilience is the story we're creating in our head. And I do have a slide to share later on where we can go through the model, but the long and short of it is that we are always talking to ourselves. We are always creating meaning around the events. And we really need to start monitoring what story we are telling ourselves in order to manage how we're feeling about it. So I'll save the rest of that for later. But the last part, I shouldn't say the last, but another really important part of resilience is also remembering that we have to have fun, that it's important to relax. We should never push relaxation aside as something, as a leftover. And I love to use this example. So many parts of our pillars of self-care actually are really important to us. But you know what we do is we leave them for the leftovers of our time. It's like, I know that meditation will be really good, so I'll get to that later. And we never get to it later, right? Or exercise is another one. Like, you know what? I need to do X, Y, Z, and I'll do that later. Well, then guess what? Later never comes, right? And so leaving something, if something is super critical to us, we should not be leaving it to the leftovers of our time, because who has enough time? Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm one of those strange individuals that gets up at, to be at my 6 a.m. class, because I know I do not work out in the evening. Absolutely not. I have to do it first or it never happens. Yeah. So why don't we go to the next slide? Environment, which is a really interesting pillar in the sense, again, I think some people really ignore this as part of their self-care. They don't realize the impact of our physical surroundings. I think environment has taken on a huge different meaning with COVID. It's really given some highlight to how much we are impacted by our social environment, the larger environment, and how you really cannot be impacted on, everyone's impacted on some level. And so environment really is reminding us of the interconnectivity between our internal environments, like what's going on inside of us, and our external environment. So if one is out of balance, we are out of balance. How many times, like even before I gave this presentation, I had to clean off my desk because it was getting cluttered in from my morning of clients and things I had grabbed and cups I had used. And I thought, you know what, in order to focus, to feel grounded, I needed to clean up my stuff around me. And so that can be even cleaning out a drawer that's been bothering you. So I don't know, any thoughts about environment? I know that La Suprema has put so much effort into a beautiful environment.
Yes.
So you must have some sense of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a source of sanity for sure. I mean, just in my own personal life, I live in a house of 5 people, all adults, and a lot of folks are working from home, and at the very least spending more time at home than ever before. And the environment is very important to me. So I'm like, I know I couldn't work from home in that way, because I like need it to be perfect before I can focus on what I'm doing. And there's no way it could be perfect right now.
Yeah.
Like I would need to like have a locked space where I'm like, do not enter, for me to feel that way. So I'm so grateful to have La Suprema and to like create this space for other people where like there's nothing more to do here for other folks. Like it's ready basically.
Well, I think, and again, with most people spending so much more time at home, it's really highlighted the importance of our home surroundings. And we know there's been a huge increase in home projects. I also think it's kind of funny, just as a side note, that when we moved from Kansas City to Pittsburgh 5 years ago, anyone who knows me knows that I loved my open floor plan of my Kansas City home, which was really hard to find here in Pittsburgh. A lot of the homes are traditional. And so what I've heard is there's a new swing to less open floor plans now that people are spending so much time at home and they need their own space, that the pendulum is now swinging into new home design being back to more, traditional.
That is hilarious because
So,
my partner and I bought a house in last March, and we did a lot of renovating and to an open floor plan. And now here we are, like, it's funny, like we can't, we can't eat dinner without kind of like the TV being there and people working. Like it's all kind of one large thing. So that is a really funny point that you make.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm being vindicated. We are in our traditional home that is not open.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so we kind of just did a really fast brush through of the 7 pillars, and I hope I just gave you maybe some ideas to think about. When we decide that we want to focus on one of those areas, I think it's really important. And if I were to suggest anyone to pull out a piece of paper and pencil at any point, this would be the place where we do it, where you want to sit down. Like, if one of the things I miss about being in person is I wish we could have like an open audience discussion, but what do you really truly love in your life? What do you love to do? How do you love to be? How do you love to feel? And we begin to use that to build, like, what's our mission or purpose in life? What's important to you? What do you take pride in? One of the questions that throws a lot of people off, and this is really fun when I'm working with some of my male clients, I should preface that. So there's a dealership that I work with. And so I'm working with some guys that work at a local dealership, and they've never been asked the question of like, what do you want your legacy of your life to be? Like, that's just not in their repertoire. Like, for some people, that's things that they very much think about, but not everybody does. And so just taking time to really think about, like, what do you want to be known for? Like, do you want to be known as the kind person that always has a smile? Is it loftier than that? Like, you want to leave a stamp on, large groups of people? It doesn't have to be huge, but I think you need to kind of be clear about what you want your legacy, or what is important to you. What do you aspire to be, to do, to achieve? And I hope for most of us that never, ever, ever ends, right? Like, I think I'll be a curious learner for the rest of my life. But when we are able to tap into the bigger why, like, what's important to me, then we can start to understand, like, what's going to drive our change. So asking yourself, like, well, why do you want to be healthier? Like, and then connecting that to your mission, your aspirations, your purpose, your vision map. It's also important to take note of, like, how do you already take care of yourself? Because again, some people don't give themselves credit for where they do. We're really good at bashing ourselves, and we're really good at looking at where we don't measure up. And in fact, with those 7 pillars, one of the caveats I want to say to folks is that, of course, we can probably all do better work in every single category. And it's not the purpose to get overwhelmed. The purpose is just to kind of pick where do you start? Where do you want to make a change? What's most important right now at this point in your life? And then connecting it to your purpose, your meaning, what that is, the deeper meaning. So for instance, a lot of people will say, like, yes, like certain chronic illness runs in my family. So if diabetes, for instance, runs in your family, and you can see in the older generations, like how it's impacting their later years, your big why might be that you want to be healthy and vivacious as a grandparent for the kids that you have now. And so it's, even though that seems really far out, it can be powerful if you're able to really dive into that, into why it's important making these changes. Maybe it's more immediate. Maybe it's like you're just feeling super cranky all the time and you want to be nicer to the people around you. But finding your deeper why. Okay, let's move on.
That's great.
Because we can want, this is a huge, I've been chewing on this one a lot. This has been a lot of fun with my clients lately. The difference between wanting something and committing to something. So the mission, the purpose, the deeper why can really come into play with this concept. So there's a really painful gap between what people want and what they actually do. And I'm going to just use weight loss. This is an easy one. We can want to lose weight all we want. And we can desire it to the point where like no one would doubt that you want to lose weight, that it's desperately something that you want to do. But wanting in and of itself is passive. It's kind of easy because you're not making any changes. And because you're not making any changes, there's no change in your results. Versus, I'm 100% committed. 100% commitment doesn't mean 100% perfection. I just want to be clear about that. But commitment is active. It's taking steps. It's getting uncomfortable. So it's saying no to that snack in the drawer. Yeah. And in the moment, that's not comfortable. But what you want to remind yourself in those moments is that your brain's screaming at you, you're going to die without the snack, but you need to remind yourself, like, I'm actually not going to die. I'll live, right? So you sit with that uncomfortable moment, and then that commitment creates progress. It creates moving forward, and then you begin to see a change in your results. So wanting to lose weight can be an amazing, wonderful goal, right? A wonderful aspiration. But what are my commitments that I'm making to get to that goal? One of the examples in the little book that I'm reading was when she did a behavior analysis on herself and she really looked at what her actions were doing. She's realized, you know what? She was actually 100% committed to her nighttime soda and popcorn bowl. That's where her commitment was showing up, right?
Yeah.
And I started to laugh when I read that. I'm like, I guess we all have our popcorn bowls. Yeah. Where we are spending our time and our energy and our focus is going to show us where we're actually committed. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. And I feel like it's good practice when you are committed to things, normally you schedule them so you can understand what you are actually committed to, right? I mean, there's so many things that I want and goals I have, but I will lack actually writing them down and scheduling the time in. And so that I'm, it's like, oh yeah, I want all these things. I'm such a time optimist sometimes, but we have to be realistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's move to the next slide for the sake of time. So I think this came out of BJ Fogg's new book, Tiny Habits, but aspirations are abstract desires, like wanting to be a kind person or sleep better or be more productive. And there's nothing wrong with having aspirations. Like, that's good. I was just telling you a few slides ago to have some aspirations and to get clear about them. But behaviors are the actions you can do right now or at some other specific point in time, right? And so that's kind of like that difference between, like, I want something, I desire something, I desire like being more productive, or I desire being, to sleep better. But it's like, so if we're desiring better sleep, then we need to look at our behaviors in terms of how we're going to get that better sleep. Okay, let's move on. So when we're looking at change, and this is BJ Fogg again, the three things that we can do when we're trying to design a successful change in our life, first and foremost, and this really comes across so many people would say this: stop judging yourself. Change happens in a positive space so much more in a negative space. Take your aspirations and you break them down into tiny behaviors. And then you embrace the mistakes as discoveries. So when I was talking back a few minutes ago about food planning, for instance, so the new thing I'm doing is writing down the night before what I'm going to eat the next day. I think out of the last number of weeks, I probably only followed my plan exactly 2 days each week, maybe one week, 2 days another week. Like it was really low. But what I'm doing with that is I'm looking at as discovery, like what's happening in my head, what's happening in my habits, when am I actually hungry? And I'm trying to make decisions without it being like hard on myself, but just understanding like where it's coming from. And so anytime we want to make changes, it's having that curiosity and trying to figure out and game plan around why it's not working. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because motivation is fickle. Our motivation does not drive us. We can have high motivation one moment and it's gone the next. Next slide. Because this is where the real money is. Your thoughts create your feelings. To change our behaviors. Oh, I have a typo in there. Sorry, folks. You must change the way you think and the way you feel. So this is the model, and this is the thing that I spend a lot of time with. At any given point, our circumstance is the facts. It's what's happening around us. And you know what? Circumstances are actually neutral until we start to think about it. It's our interpretations. It's our beliefs. I've heard so many variations of this anywhere. It used to be like 7,000 to 12,000 thoughts a day. Now I'm hearing things like, 40,000 thoughts a day. I mean, I don't know how we actually catalog how many thoughts we have because some of our thoughts are running beneath the surface in their habit. So when I'm thirsty and I pick up this glass, each energy is thought. Every energy is thought. And that energy picked up my glass, but I wasn't actually thinking about how to pick up that glass. But when you're a baby and you're learning how to pick up stuff, you're actually thinking about it. And then eventually your cortex, your higher thinking part says, that's a pattern. I don't need to think about it anymore. And it files it down into the more immediate, faster motor type parts of your brain. And so you don't have to think about thinking about it. So that can muck us up too. But mainly in most every day, we need to be aware of what we're thinking because what we're thinking produces our feelings. Let me say that again. What we are thinking produces our feelings. Yeah. Your feeling physiologically lasts in your body, like the literal electrical charge is maybe a couple seconds. So in order to continue feeling something, your thoughts keep firing it. Feeling is a vibration in your body. However, those feelings actually drive what we do or don't do. So sometimes my feelings drive me to go ahead and do something. And sometimes my feelings actually cause me to withdraw or avoid. And so that I'm not doing something. And then ultimately you're getting a result in your life. So any questions on that? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then this is what I was just saying is that your thoughts become habits. They're like shortcuts in your mind. Your brain is a machine. It just wants to be efficient. And so I use the example of the glass, but the other thing that I think was really fun is, so when, again, I'm sorry guys, I'm noticing another typo. When the cortex loses its wiring for those steps, the cerebellum takes over. And one of the examples of that is, so reciting the Hail Mary, for instance, it's a Catholic prayer. I can recite it from beginning to end, no problem. But at one point, this was a while ago, my son asked me a question about what does it mean to be, he asked me a question about the words in the prayer and what came before or after it. And I couldn't just immediately answer it. I actually had to go back through the entire prayer to get to the point where what he was asking me about, because it's become such a rote memory for me. For some people, it might even be like, the alphabet, like they actually have to do the ABCs in their head to remember exactly where that letter comes in the alphabet. And it's because our brain is just, it creates these shortcuts that we don't even have to think about what we're thinking about. Alex, are we okay going over a few minutes?
Yes. Oh, we definitely are. And we started a few minutes late because of the mix up with Facebook and stuff. So it's okay. Those that can
Okay.
stay. And I'll just keep recording. So people have to join in later. That's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other example that I love to give about how our thoughts can become habits. And I think this is really important because so many people get frustrated, like, why am I doing this thing that I don't want to do? And sometimes like I find myself, continuing to use the food example, I find myself in the pantry and eating something and I didn't even realize I was going to do it until I was doing it. Or, people could be, I don't know, they're in the middle of an argument and they're already fired up and, 10 steps ahead and they didn't even realize it. And the ski slope, I think, is a perfect example of how I can illustrate how these thoughts become really hardwired and sort of coded in. So this is the season in the Pittsburgh area and the New York and Pennsylvania area for skiing, and probably out west some places. So imagine if you are standing at the top of a very steep hill and it's been a heavy, wet snow, a pretty thick, heavy, wet snow, and you're going to be the first person to go down that ski slope. So this is kind of like what hardwiring of our thoughts looks like. So I've seen on screens, like when we're having a thought, our synapses look like little jerky kind of electrical currents, right? So when we're thinking, our brain is sending these little electric currents. So to use the ski slope example, imagine you're standing up, you're the first person, and if the snow is kind of heavy, wet, thick, and there's no path in front of you, you might have to use your ski poles to kind of get a little traction. And it's a little jerky. It's a little bit tough to kind of move through that snow. But if the person behind you were to follow the same two tracks, it's going to be a little easier. They're going to go down a little faster. 5th, 6th, 20th person, that snow is packed down. They're going to fly down that ski slope. They're going to have no problems, no jerkiness. And that's what happens when we think something over and over again. You're packing down the wiring, you're packing down that neural pathway. And your brain loves to be a machine that's efficient. And it's always going to choose the fast pack down before it stops and says, should I take a different fork? It's not. It's going to go down the fast way unless you begin to put like very conscientious stop gaps in there. So what I always say to clients, what we want to do when you have a negative thinking pattern, so your brain's not differentiating, hey, this is a great thought, let's keep repeating this, and this is a good habit, and this is a bad habit. Your brain actually isn't, it's just picking up habits. And what we need to do is like move the skis, form a new habit so that you begin to sort of prune out the old ones. So because this leads into back to your earlier question, cravings. I won't spend a whole lot of time here, but when we start to have very subtle thoughts like, I want it, I want to have it, it sounds good. Or like if someone, maybe their habit is also social media at night. Like we have these thoughts that begin to create desire. And then when we have that desire, it's really hard to turn it off. And then I think I gave this example earlier. So your 3 choices with the craving or to have it and reinforce it, really fight and get ticked off that you can't have that thing, or sit with the discomfort. And that's where you could be creating new neural pathway too, like creating that change, moving the skis, for example, because you are implementing different thoughts to begin to override the craving thoughts. So go ahead. Fun. If you haven't noticed, a lot of the work is around our thoughts. So if you drag your thoughts away from your troubles by the ears, by the hands, or any other way you can manage it. Mark Twain. I mean, we've known this for years, but it's still the problem of today, right? So one of the things that we can do to explore ways to stop a habit is write down, again, get specific. Write down the habit you want to stop or the one you want to add in. Think of ways that and this is just specifically stopping a habit. Think of the ways that you might want to remove or avoid a prompt. So, if there's something that you are, like a lot of my clients spend a lot of time on social media. So one of the ways they might remove or avoid the prompt is like take the phone out of their bedroom at night. Thinking of ways to make it harder to do, and then think of ways to reduce your motivation. Next slide. Ways to add in things would be like tiny habits. So I love his methodology on this. I'm picking my way through his newest book called Tiny Habits. So when we want to add in a habit, we can anchor that into a moment on an existing habit or routine. So it's easier to add a new habit in when you have a habit already in place. And you identify what that tiny behavior is going to be and do it immediately after the anchoring moment. So one of the examples he gave was, or I heard it on a podcast, was like while someone was brewing her morning coffee, which she does every morning, she decided that would be a great time to do 10 squats, which I thought was brilliant, right? Because, you know, in the moment, 10 squats probably doesn't add up to like immediate change. But if she does it every single morning, those squats are going to begin to produce change. And it didn't take a lot of extra time or energy. And then the other thing that BJ Fogg has found with his, and he, by the way, BJ Fogg, for those that don't know, he is the founder of the Behavioral Institute at Stanford. So he's a pretty smart guy. And he talks about the importance of like celebrating those little successes. And he like either like, which may be silly, but a little like, yes, you know, like a little outward yes. I always laugh because I think about, you know, how we reward our kids, like, good job, good job. And we do it so naturally for little kids. The funny thing is that so many of these behaviors like sleep routine, rewarding ourselves for a good job, we think that it's not important for our adult brain when in fact we actually need the same reinforcement. And the really cool thing about tiny habits is when we start to think about it from the terms of a compound effect. So a compound effect, you know, like so often, and I'm using exercise again, but so many of my clients would say things like, you know, they can't find time to fit in a 30-minute or 40-minute or an hour workout. And so then they just give up on it because they're like, well, it's really not going to amount to much, or they can only work out once a week. And so once a week just doesn't seem like enough. It's an all or nothing. So they're just like, yeah, forget it. It doesn't even matter. Right. However, what if that 1 hour a week was consistent? What if they actually just stuck with the simple thing, the 1 hour a week? And then at the end of a year, 52 hours of working out, I think your body would notice a difference. But it's so easy to trash the small thing because we don't think it's big enough, that it's going to make change. Yet it's that if we were to be consistent, that could be huge. So yeah, you can move on. Thank you. Okay, we're getting close. So the 5-step process for making a commitment to any kind of change you want to make: identifying why do you want this? Getting honest with yourself, because sometimes we need to really assess, are we really willing and ready to commit to something? And it's okay to say no, not right now, but then you're staying in the wanting stage, right? So you make a decision to commit, you write it down, and then you honor your commitment until you get the results. It doesn't mean that you're going to make it's a perfect journey, but you continue to honor your commitment until you get where you want to be. And a lot of times it takes that reevaluation and reaffirming. So I review and I revise, and then I ask myself, how can I get more committed? We all know what we're doing. Most of us know where we need to change. We just have to think through, like, are we committed or are we just trying? Because trying implies failure. Trying it's the flip side already to saying, well, I'm good. There's a good chance I'm going to fail at this. And I used to joke, the example I used to use before the popcorn example was, you know, when people get married, we talk about that from a commitment standpoint. They don't get up in front of the pastor or the priest or the officiant and say, I'm going to try to be faithful to you for the rest of my life. Like, there's no try in those words. It's a commitment. And so I really think that people know how to commit because they do it all the time in different ways. People do it for their families. They do it at work, but learning how to do that for yourself, where you need to commit. So the takeaway points: telling yourself that you can't have something or do something creates desire. Immediately when we say I can't have something, we immediately want that thing. So we just need to reframe it in our head. This comes back to thought management again. It's not that I can't have something. I am deciding to not have it right now for the longer term goal. I've said this a number of times: get specific, write it down. You can Google, the SMART goal, which is specific, measurable, actionable, reasonable, and time related, meaning it's very specific. You can measure it. You can actually do it. It's a reasonable goal, and you give it a specific time. Very important to stop bashing yourself. And also very important to realize that your thoughts can also get in the way when we use our past to predict our future. When we look at past failed attempts and we use that to predict our future, we are putting a ceiling on what we can actually achieve. And so it's really learning how to identify and make sure that we're not using our past to predict what we can create in the future. So if you could make the change you wanted, what would you be able to have? What would you be able to experience? How would you feel about yourself? And what areas of your life would be better? And that would be it. Just some of my resources. Thanks.
Oh, I was muted. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Tara, and if you're willing, I can send this presentation out to folks so they have this as a resource.
Sure.
Awesome. So that everyone can check out some of those favorite resources. And most folks actually stayed with us till the end. So thank you all for being with us. And Tara, thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible. So helpful. My notebook is completely filled with notes.
Sorry for going over. I think we spent too much time a little bit in the beginning, but I just love all these subjects. Like, this is what I spend my day working on. So I appreciate everybody showing up.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too. And this will be shared again. So I'll send this out to all of the RSVPs. It'll be on YouTube as a resource so folks can refer back to it. But I think this was very great timing. And again, thank you so much. So.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.